Hello and welcome to this little tutorial in which I'm going to show you how to make a simple cutlery roll. The principles we're using for the cutlery roll today can be transferred to any other sort of project. You could make a pencil roll, you could make a roll for your crochet hooks or your knitting needles or your makeup brushes. There's a whole host of different things that you could transfer the same principles across to. But today I'm looking at making a small cutlery roll with the thoughts of social distance picnics and to make our cutlery roll we are going to use two pieces of fabric, which are these long pieces here, and these pieces are 7 inches wide by 14.5 inches tall. And just to help you understand how I arrived at those measurements, I'll just take that one out of the way for you. I want to be able to contain my 3 main pieces of cutlery within it. So I've spaced those out so that they're not going to hit each other when they're in their pockets. And I've also added some space on at the sides. And then when they're in their pocket like so, this bit's going to actually fold down over the top. So I've added a bit extra on for height. So for my standard size cutlery, that's worked out at 7 inches wide by 14.5 inches tall. And I've cut 2 pieces of that, and I've used denim for both of those. And then I've cut a piece of fabric which is 7 inches wide by 10.5 inches tall, which is going to go down the bottom here and be the pocket for my cutlery. Now I wanted to be able to support the cutlery because it's quite heavy cutlery, so that's quite tall. But if you were doing it for pencils or makeup brushes, you might want that bit at the bottom to be a bit lower down so that you can see what you're choosing from a little bit easier. But as I say, I need it to be quite tall pockets, so to support the cutlery. So I've cut 10.5 inches tall, and what I haven't yet explained is that that's actually folded in half, so that's why it looks so short. So it's 10.5 by 7, and I've folded it in half, like so. Okay, so what do we need to do to get started? The very first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our folded pocket piece, and we're going to attach that to the bottom of one of our tall pieces, and I'm just going to do a line of machine stitching along here. It's going to be a basting stitch effectively. I just want to tack it into place so that when I come to do my pockets in a moment, I know it's not going to move around too much. So I'm just going to do a line of stitching about 1/4 inch in from the edge at the bottom, just to hold it all together. Okay, so having attached this pocket piece to the back piece, I now need to think about the pocket sizes that I want. So if I look at my cutlery against my ruler for a moment, it's got quite a round base here, which is about 1 inch. So I'd want to make my pockets bigger than 1 inch because it's quite 3-dimensional, especially on the knife. It's quite rounded. So I don't think 1 inch pocket would be big enough. So I'm going to allow 1.5 inches for my pockets. And I want my pockets to be central in my piece of fabric. So I'm going to take my ruler back to the start point. So I'm measuring 7 inches across. And my first pocket is going to be at 3.5. So I can just put a marker there. And then I know that I need to come out 1.5 inches from that in total. So that's 3/4 inch either side. So that would take me from 3.5 to 2 3/4. And then 1.5 inches from there is going to take me down to 1.25. So the first line that I want is going to be 1.25 inches in from the edge of my fabric. So there'll be a line of stitching approximately here, and then 1, 2, and then another line over here to create 3 channels for my pieces of cutlery. So my fabric is definitely plenty wide enough for the cutlery that's going to go within it, but that's fine because I was going to do some top stitch detailing around the edge. So we need to do parallel lines of stitching. Now you've got a few options. One of them would be to mark them on using something like this friction pen. Let me just hold that up so you can see. Where's the word? Remove by friction. But where's the actual? Oh, it's on the lid. There we go. Friction pen. And you can find those in most stationers and quite often now in haberdashery stores as well. And they're good for writing on paper because you can rub it out using the end, but you can also use them on fabric and iron it away. So I could do my lines using my friction pen and then just iron them away later. But I wanted to show you today how to use a quilting bar if you've got one with your sewing machine, which you might never have used before. So what I am going to do is I'm just going to draw on or just mark where my first line is going to go. So it's going to go 1¼ inches in from the edge, and I'll start down this side, so it's just going to be there. And I want my lines to be 1½ inches. Oops, not sure you saw that, but that's 1¼ inches in, and I want my lines to be 1½ inches wide. So I'll take you over to the sewing machine and show you how to use a quilting bar. Okay, so when you bought your sewing machine, you may or may not have had something that looks a bit like this in your accessory pack. It might not have had such a complicated bit at the bottom here. It might have just been a straight bar down, but it would definitely have been a bar across. And if you didn't get one with your sewing machine, you sometimes get them when you buy a walking foot, because a walking foot is often used by quilters, and a quilting bar would often be used by quilters too. So the quilting bar, if you're using a walking foot, slots into the hole at the back of the foot. If you're not using your if you're not using your walking foot, then what you find is that it will slot into a hole just at the back of the machine. So I'm just going to slot it in. And then take you a little bit closer to see how it's fitted in. So it's actually poking out this area here, and it's gone through a hole in the sewing machine just there in the back of the foot. And this foot has got it highlighted in red, but it can be highlighted in all sorts of different colours, or it might not be that obvious at all, but there will be some sort of hole for your quilting bar to go through. This is a really useful contraption for seam allowances that might otherwise be too wide. So at the moment, if I want to sew a straight line of stitching down here, I can still reference my needle plate here quite happily. So I'm going to put my first line of stitching in just by keeping my eye on the edge of the needle plate here to keep this nice and straight. So I'm just going to start off with a few stitches, do some reversing, and then come back up. At the top, you need to make sure you do a good strong reverse, because that's going to be a point of wear. And I'm going to avoid going off the end of the linen into the denim, so that's my last stitch, and I can take that out of the machine. Okay, so this is where the quilting bar comes in. If I want my pockets to be a 1½ inch, I decided, didn't I? 1½ inch wide. I can put my ruler on my old line of stitching and bring my fabric along until the reference point of the centre of my presser foot is representing the 1½ inch that I'm looking for. And then at this point, I can push the quilting bar in until it is sitting nice and snug with the end of my ruler. And at this point, the quilting bar is also sitting on top of my line of stitching. So now, if I lower my presser foot down, if I keep my quilting bar on top of my stitching, this pocket should be parallel to that line of stitching. So this line of stitching will be parallel to that line of stitching, making my pocket nice and parallel as well. So I'm going to start at the bottom, do a few reversing stitches, and then I'm sewing up to the top, all the time referencing the quilting bar on the old line of stitching that I just did. There we go. Take that out of the machine. And I don't know how clearly you can see that, but there are nice parallel lines of stitching. So that's my first pocket. So now I'm going to line up for my second pocket. So I'm going to put the quilting bar under the line of stitching that I've just done. And then I will be dropping my needle down so that quilting bar is covering up that line of stitching. Now the lovely thing about the quilting bar is that even though you're moving fabric around, it doesn't actually move around too much in its hole because it's quite a snug fit. So I'm just following that line of stitching, going down the fabric, and when I'm getting to the top of the pocket, just being careful again that I don't go over onto the denim, because I really don't want to have any stitches showing. And that's the wonder of the quilting bar, really. It allows you to follow the line of stitching and have beautiful parallel pockets. So I'll just take that out of the machine and we'll see what we've got. So just to show you the quilting bar from a different angle, I've just finished one line of stitching. I moved that line of stitching to sit underneath the quilting bar, and I line my needle up with the top of the fabric where I'm going to start to sew. And then all the time that quilting bar is running down my old line of stitching, so that's the one I have just sewn, my next line of stitching will be parallel. So a few stitches to start, and reverse, and then I shall just come down, keeping this straight. And there we are, my parallel pockets all complete. So with my pockets all complete, I'm going to keep these threads and I will take those through to the back with a needle. We're now ready to put the two pieces of denim, stitch them together right side through so we can turn it through. But before I do that, I'm going to attach some cotton tape. So this is going to allow me to tie the cutlery roll up when it's done. This is recycled off of a carrier bag of some sort, and I'm just going to pop that just above the point at which my pocket ends, because from memory when I was looking at my cutlery, that was about halfway to 2/3 of the way up the cutlery. So I think that would be a nice point at which to have the tie, because this is going to come down over the top. So I'm just going to sandwich that there in between the two layers of denim. You could of course use two pieces of ribbon, but I've just got one piece of cotton tape that I'm just going to fold in half. So I'm going to pin most definitely where that is, and then I'm going to pin all the way around my project. But I am going to leave a hole in the side over here. So I'm just going to put one of my big pins there to remind me, and one of my big pins there to remind me that that's going to be my hole for turning through. And then everywhere else I'm just looking to stitch it all together. Okay, so that's all pinned. Just put one more in actually up here. I'm going to take that over to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch all the way around, leaving an opening for turning through between my two large pins. So I've stitched all the way round now with my opening still here. And for those of you that might have seen a different one of my tutorials, my top tip when you're turning through is to just finger press or press with an iron, depends on what your fabric is like, that seam allowance back on both sides of the seam before you turn through, so that you create a really nice crisp edge for sewing shut, whether you're doing it by hand or machine. It just makes life a lot easier. So I'm just going to do that with finger pressing, and then I'm going to start to turn through. Oh, just going to clip my corners. So a little bit off in that corner and in that corner. A few threads down there. Take a bit off in that corner and a bit off in that corner. There we go. So this is going to be a bit stiff for a minute. See it all coming through. So your fingers down, and this is where you also want a trusty knitting needle. Oh, I can see the blue coming off on my hands. I do love denim, but that's the one thing about working with brand new denim, is that you can end up with it colouring you and your furniture. Ever worn a pair of blue jeans that were brand new and left a slightly blue tinge to a cream sofa cushion? Because I know I have. So pushing out down there, being careful not to push too firmly, and then also in the top. So like so. Give it a little poke with the knitting needle. Slightly easier at this end because you've only got the 2 layers of denim, whereas at the other end you've got the extra layers of linen as well. Okay, so I'm going to take that away and give that a really good press at this point, and I'll use my big steam iron for that, so that these seams down here at the bottom where you've got quite a few layers of fabric get a really nice press flat. Make sure that's all pressed in nicely as well, because then I'm going to top stitch all the way around the outside to give it a really nice finish. So I'll go and give it a press, and I'll give it a top stitch, and I'll bring it back to show you. Okay, so I've given it a good press. I have top stitched all around the outside, and I can now put my cutlery inside. Fits in nicely. There is actually an additional little space at the edges. I could just, if I just poke this pencil down inside, there's an extra slot there, and at the other side, so there's plenty of room. This is then going to fold down over the top. So when you've had your meal wherever you are outside, you can cover your cutlery up, roll it up, tuck that one inside, and then this is going to wrap around in both directions and get tied shut. And there is your cutlery roll. So if you're going to go and have a picnic or go and visit friends, take your cutlery in a cutlery roll, and you can take it home to wash it, and it's not going to end up making a load of mess in your bag. So I hope you've liked that tutorial, and if you make something, I do like to see the pictures, so tag us on Instagram and Facebook, and the tag is @MadeandMaking. Thanks very much. Bye.